Shalom again.
Shabbat shalom.
And I'm going to do a study today that I think I've been asked to do for about 7 years. And I've neglected to put it together. But finally I do, and we will do it. It's on the topic of tithing. I don't know if subconsciously I neglected this, not to give the wrong impression to people. But tithing is important. It's a commandment. There are blessings that are involved with it or the lack of it. So I think it is important that we do it and understand it. Sometimes even it comes up, how do you know that the word tithe means 10%? And it's one of the things that over the last few years I've been studying more of with Hebrew roots. And of course we know at our Ambassadors for Israel program with our Biblical Hebrew, we study a lot about Hebrew roots. And it's really great, and I'm seeing now essential to really start understanding it. Because when you're understanding that one Hebrew root can mean 171 different ways that you can do it, but it's all connected to the same thing. And a verb and a noun are the same Hebrew root. It's just the way that you put the vowelized points in it, but it means the same thing. And one thing is for certain, like when we talk about the rotating Sabbath, anybody that would understand Hebrew roots could never be mistaken by the rotating Sabbath. Because they understand that the word Shabbat and the word 7, they have the same root. So whether the Shabbat is a verb where you're actually doing it, whether it's a noun, the day, or whether you're doing like a Shavuot, the count, the 7-week count to the Hagim, the Hag called Shavuot, it all comes from the same root, which means it has to be in multiples of 7. And with the rotating Sabbath, it's not in multiples of 7. The moon cycle. So I think roots are really important. And when you're looking at the word for tithe in the Bible, the word is ma'asar. Ma'asar. And where does that come from? It comes from the number 10, Eser. Eser, ma'asar. It's the same root. And also the verb to give, asar, comes from ma'asar or Eser. It's all from the same connection. So like I said, it's really neat that we can see that we can see even the word for giving comes from the same root of tithing, and comes from the same root. The Strong's, if you're using a Strong's concordance, is 4643, and it literally is 10%. The same as, like I said, the number Eser is 10, in Hebrew. So there's no doubt about it that tithe is 10%. It's literally 10%. Proverbs 24 and verse 1, we've read it on many other things, but we'll read it with this, where it says a Psalm of David. The earth is Yahweh's and the fullness of it, the world and all those who live in it. So again, you guys know this very well from being in the program, that in the kingdom principles, everything belongs to Yahweh. In kingdom principles, in a kingdom, the king is the owner of everything. And the king also has the responsibility of caring for every single person in his kingdom. In a kingdom, you will never see a homeless person, a poor person, or anybody that's wanting in any way. That's why Psalm 23, right before this, is saying what? Yahweh is my shepherd, I shall not want. Great kingdom principle. This year, I think, out of all the courses, it seemed that people love that class on kingdom principles more than any other class. And I love it too. It's just a great class, because when your mind is always thinking in the sense of kingdom principles, it just helps you to keep you honest in so many other aspects of your life. And here it is, when you understand this, that we're not having a mindset of this world's way and Satan's kingdom, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and it's survival of the strongest. That's what evolution is, evolution or evolution. It's the survival of the strongest, and the other ones die out. Isn't that exactly what Hitler was trying to purport, this kind of thinking? Where with Yahweh, it's the opposite. Yahweh is that the weakest ones among us are our strongest people. We just don't realize it. And that's why, like I said, in a kingdom principle, although everything belongs to Yahweh, Yahweh makes sure that every single person in his kingdom is cared for. So again, if everything belongs to Yahweh, there's no private ownership in a kingdom, then really, when we think about it, every single thing belongs to him. So again, the clothes I'm wearing I'm wearing a jacket that came from material that he created. I'm wearing cotton pants that came from things that were grown, from his creation. So none of it belongs to me. There's nothing, like it says, naked you came into the world, naked you could go out. We basically, even our very flesh is made from Yahweh's dirt of the ground, that we come from, and to dirt we go back. From dust we are, to dust we shall return. So there's nothing that we own. There's absolutely nothing we own, because anything that you're producing is being given from what was Yahweh's. So I can't say, you know what, so-and-so, you come and work for me, and then at the end of the week, I'm going to give you, from all your work, I'll give you 5 sheep. And then I'll give you this guy sheep. Well, wait a second, they're not my sheep. How can I give you, Jacob's sheep? They don't belong to me. So the same way, whatever you're working for, the pay that someone is giving you is being produced from something that Yahweh already owned. So that's the first concept we have to get, even before we get into the tithe, is the fact that everything belongs to Yahweh. 100% of everything. There's nothing that we physically own. And that's why even when the Apostle Paul was talking about this in the New Covenant, what does he say? That we are to possess without owning. Nothing wrong with possessing. Yahweh allows us to possess clothes, to possess vehicles, to possess computers, whatever we need, because he cares for us as his people, and everything we're possessing, which we would be using for the glory of Yahweh, for his kingdom. That's what the purpose of it is. And we'll see the same with the tithe. But literally, to have this concept that everything belongs to Yahweh to begin with, it actually makes tithing a pretty good system, that Yahweh set up for us. So Yahweh actually will allow us to keep resources that are his, to care for our personal needs. All of us are human beings. We need to eat food. We need to clothe ourselves. And Yahweh will bless us with that, with the increase of our efforts from work. Whether that's working outside in your garden and producing fruit, or whether that's working physically in a place where somebody's giving you at the end of the week, whether it's 5 sheep, or whether it's a little piece of paper that you're going to change into silver coins, or in this day, pieces of paper that represent that silver, and you're going to use it to go and buy your needs, that Yahweh allows this. So it's not something that Yahweh is against. It's not something that Yahweh has restricted. He set up the system, but he did set a little thing in there that, like I said, even though he owns all of it, he says, you know what? Because you have these needs and you have to care for yourself, I am going to honor that, and I'm going to allow you to keep what you're working for, but 10% has to come back to me. 10% has to come to me. It's a principle. And believe it or not, and I'll show you very clearly here, that tithing started from creation. It's a principle that Yahweh has, that whenever we receive, we give something back. Isn't that a kingdom principle? That nothing is just for me. Okay, I'm going to get this and I keep all of it. Here it is. I have an orange tree, or a grapefruit tree. And there's 100 grapefruits on there, and you know what? They all taste good because I ate all of them. That's not the way it works. The way it works is whatever I'm being blessed with, whether it's a grapefruit on a tree, or whether it's a little piece of paper that I'm going to exchange for money, or whether it's fruit in my garden, whatever it is, something goes back to other people. That's Yahweh's economy, and that's the way it works. There was one time that we were meeting brethren when we were in the States, and these were people that were not doing so well. They were having some financial difficulties, and we were blessed with some money that we worked for, and we decided that we were going to share money with them. And we said, well, they really need it, and we were all excited when we met them that we were going to give them this money in an envelope, and we didn't realize they had worked or something happened, and the same thing happened to them. So we gave them one envelope filled with money, they gave us another envelope filled with money, and believe it or not, it was the same amount of money. Isn't that amazing? We said Yahweh's economy. That's the way it goes. You give it to me, I'll give it to him, he gives it to him. And that's why, like I said, years back, there are people that are very good givers, but they never want to take. So they're ready to give you the shirt off their back, but here when you want to share with them, they no, I don't want it, no, I don't need it, no, I don't want it. And we realized, anytime somebody is giving, there's a blessing there. There's a blessing to when you give. So if I'm going to say, no, don't give that to me, I'm holding a blessing back from you. So even if it's a dress, I'm not going to use a dress. I'm not going to wear a dress, at least anyway. But if you want to give me a dress, I'll take it, because you know what? I'll give it to somebody else that needs it. And that's what we need to have. That's Yahweh's economy. That whatever goes into this hand goes out into this hand. And in between, there might be something you use. So if someone gives me a bag of oranges, there's 20 oranges and I can't eat 20 oranges, maybe I'll eat 2 and then I'll give 18 to somebody else, whatever it is. Yahweh's economy goes around. That's the way it is. So that's the tithing system. The tithing system, the principle of the tithing system, is that whenever we receive, we give back. And we know from Yeshua, we'll read it later in Acts 20, it's more blessed to give than to receive. So maybe in the world, we loved receiving, whether it was a pagan holiday that we were getting some kind of gift, or it was something else. It was always great. Wow, what did I get? And you can't wait. You can't even sleep the night before when you know the gifts are coming your way, and you can't wait to rip them all open and see everything you get. But with the Spirit of Yahweh, it's different. With the Spirit of Yahweh, we're more excited about giving to somebody else than receiving ourselves. Everywhere we go in the world, people always will ask us, hey, we know that you don't take salary. What do you need? And we can honestly say at this point, we need nothing. Yahweh's provided all of our needs, and at times somebody may give us a piece of clothing or something else or something we need and we'll use it, but Yahweh provides all our needs, So we can't complain, and we see that Yahweh's system works. The tithing system works. So again, first thing I want to start with is the principle. Now I will get into this principle that there are different times that we're going to see where Yahweh, during the time of Israel, used his tithe for something very specific, for the building of the sanctuary, for the work of the ministry in the Old Covenant. But there's people that think, because there's no temple today, you don't have to tithe. And like I said, if this is a principle that's part of Yahweh's character, that every time you receive, you give back, it has nothing to do with the temple in Jerusalem. Absolutely nothing. And I'll show you this. Let's start in Genesis 14. In Genesis, the 14th chapter. This is well before there's ever a nation called Israel. This is before actually even Jacob, whose name is later changed to Israel. This is before he's even born. This is before there's any 12 tribes of Israel. This is before there's a land of Israel. And certainly before there's any kind of sanctuary of Yahweh in Jerusalem or Levitical system. But in Genesis 14, in verse 18, this is when Abraham is meeting Melchizedek, which again we said is a title, meaning the king of righteousness, literally Yeshua. He's meeting Melchizedek. And it says in Melchizedek, verse 18, Genesis 14, Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High El. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High El, possessor of heaven and earth. What did we just say? Kingdom principle. Everything belongs to Yahweh, right? And blessed be the Most High El, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he, Abraham, gave him a tithe of all. This is in Hebrews 7. We'll go over that in a little while. But clearly it's Abraham that's giving the tithe. Abraham is giving a tithe to Melchizedek, the king of righteousness. So again, is the tithe holy? Yes. Is the tithe Yahweh's? Yes. Does it have anything to do with a sanctuary? No. Only to the point that we'll see in the future that Yahweh is going to command that this tithe is to be used for the sanctuary at that point in time. We'll see in the New Testament that there's a change in the instruction of the tithe once the Levitical order is fulfilled. But again, the main point I'm making here is tithing is a principle, and it's eternal. It's eternal. It's not something that was just for a specific time. It's an eternal principle of whatever we receive, we have the blessing of giving something back. Genesis 28. Now we'll see it with Yaakov, whose name is changed to Israel. But again, this is before there's a nation of Israel. This is before there's a Moses. This is before there's a Joshua or anything else. And let's look at the covenant of tithing that our forefather Yaakov, Jacob, is going to go into. Genesis 28, verse 19. And he, Jacob, called the name of that place the house of Bethel. And yet the name of the city was at first called Luz. And Jacob vowed a vow, made a covenant, made a commitment, saying, if Elohim was with me and keeps me this way which I am going, and gives to me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and I return in peace to the house of my father, then Yahweh shall be my Elohim. And this sandstone which I have placed as a memorial pillar shall become the house of Elohim. And all which you shall give to me, I will tithe the tenth to you. All you will give to me, I will tithe the tenth to you. Now again, this is before there's ever a Levite, before there's ever a sanctuary, before there's even a written Torah, for that matter. Tithing goes way back. It's a principle, and it's something that we see here is sacred to Yahweh. It's something that is set apart or sacred to Yahweh. Now, if we go to Leviticus 27, we'll see this again. Leviticus 27, verse 26. He says, however, no man shall dedicate a firstling which is firstborn to Yahweh among animals, whether ox or sheep. It is Yahweh's. Again, first fruits, tithe, firstborn, all interchangeable. The first fruit, firstborn, tithe, 10%, it's all interchangeable. And if it is among the unclean animals, then he shall ransom it at your valuation, and he shall add its fifth to it. And if it is not redeemed, then it shall be sold at your evaluation. But any devoted thing which a man devotes to Yahweh from all which belong to him, of man or animal, or of the field of his possession, it shall not be sold nor redeemed. Every devoted thing to Yahweh is most holy. So the tithe is something that's holy. It's something that's set apart. And as we're going to see later, if you're not giving it to Yahweh, you're actually stealing from him. No devoted thing which is dedicated by man shall be ransomed, dying it shall die. And all the tithe of the land, of the seed of the land, and the fruit of the tree shall be Yahweh's. It is holy to Yahweh. Now, because of the scripture, some people say you only have to tithe on your garden. It's only the seed. But what did Jacob say? Jacob did not say only on the seed. He said, everything that's given to me, I will give the tithe to you. So again, tithing is not just simply on fruit, although fruit is part of it. It's on anything that we're increased with. That's the principle. The principle is whether it's green pieces of paper with dead dignitaries, or it's a bowl full of fruit, or it's 20 sheep. It doesn't matter what it is. If you're being increased with something, 10% goes back to Yahweh. And if a man really redeems any of his tithes, he shall add its fifth to it, and all the tithe of the herd and of the flock, and all that passes under the rod, a tenth shall be holy to Yahweh. And he shall not search whether it is good nor bad, nor shall he change it, and if he at all changes it, then it shall be that its substitute shall be holy, it shall not be redeemed. These are the commands which Yahweh's commanded Moses for the sons of Israel on Mount Sinai. And it shows you how much love and concern Yahweh has for his people. Because here's what he's saying. If all of a sudden you have 100 sheep, Yahweh's not even saying, give me the 10 best, and then you're stuck with all the bad ones, and as they reproduce, they're going to get worse and worse and worse genetically. He says, no, you got 100, they all come, and you count. Every 10th one is mine. Good, bad, or indifferent. Very simple. Showing Yahweh's fairness of it, and showing the way that Yahweh has. Verse 32. All that pass under the rod, the 10th shall be holy to Yahweh. And he says you shall not search, so it doesn't mean you purposely give Yahweh all the bad ones. We wouldn't want to do that anyway, as we're going to see from Malachi a little later. What happened when people were not giving their best to Yahweh, but they were substituting it with something that was defiled, that's not acceptable to Yahweh whatsoever. But we see in everything Yahweh is more than fair. And like I said, considering that he owns everything, he's not even saying 50-50. To me, that would be a great deal. If all of a sudden, one of you came up to me and said, hey, we got a deal for you. We're going to go out and do all the work, and we're going to use all our own money, all our own resources, and we're going to give you 50% of the profits. I would think, wow, that's a pretty good deal. I'm doing nothing, and I'm getting 50% of the profits. Well, it's the same way here. Yahweh's giving us the ability to work. Yahweh's giving us his resources to use. And if he said 50-50, man, he's got my vote. I'd go for it. And what does he say? He says, I'm doing everything for you, and all I want is 10%. That's nothing. And with the 90% we're keeping, if we are faithful and give him his 10%, he will bless you upon measure. You know, I've been in third world countries a lot, as you know, and many times people will say to me, we can't afford to tithe. And I'll tell them the opposite. I'll say, you can't afford not to tithe. Because the most successful people I've seen, even in third world countries, are the ones that tithe. You know? So if you're poor, and you don't have money, and you don't have a house, and you don't have anything, now do you want to compound all that by stealing from Yahweh? Because if you're stealing from Him, you're never going to get His blessing. And that's what I say. It's not that you're too poor to tithe. You're too poor not to tithe. The people that should be tithing the most, because Yahweh doesn't, He's so fair. If you only got $1, He's not asking for 10. He's asking for 10 cents. If you have $1 million, He's asking for 100,000. It's 10%. You know? I mean, if in the West, you know, particularly United States, but also Europe has a very heavy taxing system, if they can just get this principle, how easy would the tax codes be? You wouldn't have to have all these tax lawyers and accountants and all these other things and all these loopholes. Just simply 10%. It's such a simple principle, and it works. It works in Yahweh's economy, and it works if we apply it. But if we don't, then we're stealing from Yahweh. Very, very simple. Here it shows us in Leviticus, the tithe is something that's holy to Yahweh. We go to Exodus 13. Exodus 13. Verse 1 and 2. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, set apart to me every firstborn, the one opening the womb among the sons of Israel, among men and among livestock, they shall be mine. So again, we see first fruits, tithe. It's the firstling, the first offering. We drop down to verse 11. And it shall be when Yahweh brings you into the land of the Canaanite, as He swore to you and your fathers and gives it to you, you shall set apart to Yahweh everyone opening the womb and every firstling, the offspring of animals which are yours, the males are Yahweh's. And every firstling of an ass you shall redeem with a flock animal. And if you do not redeem, you shall break its neck. Every firstborn of men among your sons you shall redeem. And it shall be when your son asks you in the future, saying, what is this? You shall say to him, Yahweh brought us out of Egypt by the might of His hand from the house of slaves. And it happened when Pharaoh hardened himself against sending us away, Yahweh killed every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of men even to the firstborn of animals. On account of this I sacrifice to Yahweh every one of the males opening the womb, and I redeem every firstborn of my sons, and it shall be for a sign of your hand and frontlets between your eyes. Where did we see that before, right? For Yahweh brought us out from Egypt by the might of His hand. So again, like I said, we see the same thing with firstborn. Very similar. Exodus 4. Exodus 4, just like the tithe, the firstborn is something set apart for Yahweh. Exodus 4 and verse 21. This is where that last scripture is coming from. And Yahweh said to Moses, as you go to return to Egypt, see all the wonders which I have put in your hand, and do them before Pharaoh, and I will harden his heart, and he will not send the people away. And you shall speak to Pharaoh, so says Yahweh, my son, my firstborn is Israel. And I said to you, send my son away, and let him serve me, and you refuse to send him. Behold, I am about to kill your son, your firstborn. So again, whether it's the tithe, whether it's the firstborn, you know, the redemption of the firstborn, we see it's something that's set apart to Yahweh, and something that is holy or set apart to Yahweh is pretty serious. It's serious. It's the same principle that we see. Now, why is this? Why is first fruits and firstborn so serious and something that is so sacred to Yahweh? If we go to Colossians, just like we were talking about the marriage covenant. Why is the marriage covenant so sacred? Because we know when Yahweh opens up your mind through the Holy Spirit that we see that the marriage covenant is about Yeshua and the body of Messiah. And that's why the marriage covenant was instituted back in Genesis, because of the covenant of Yeshua to His bride. And the same thing here. Why is the tithe, you know, the first 10%, why is that so sacred? Like I say, when you get your check, until you set that 10% aside to Yahweh, you don't own that 90%. You have to at least set it apart. So if you make $300, you need to set apart $30. And then the $270 belong to you. What a lot of people do is they want to spend all their needs or pay their rent or whatever, and then they say, oh, we don't have enough for the tithe. And why you don't have enough is because you didn't think of Yahweh first. Just like the miracle of the fish and the loaves, right? We see that when Yahweh is put first, everything else will be taken care of. If people could just understand that simple principle. But Colossians 1 and verse 9. Colossians 1 and verse 9 says, "For this cause also from the day in which we heard, we do not cease praying on your behalf, and asking that you may be filled with the full knowledge of the will of Elohim in all wisdom and spiritual understanding. That you may live a righteous life, pleasing Yahweh in bearing fruit in every good work, and growing in the full knowledge of Elohim, being empowered with all power according to the might of his glory, to all patience and long-suffering with joy. So that you may joyfully give thanks to Yahweh the Father, who has enlightened and made us a worthy inheritance of the saints, and has delivered us out of the authority of darkness, and brought us into the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have obtained salvation and forgiveness of sins, who is the image of the invisible Elohim, the right of the firstborn of all creation." So we see, why is first fruits, tithe, so important to Yahweh? Because Yeshua is the tithe. Yeshua is that first of the first fruits. For all things were created through him, the things in the heaven and the things in the earth, the visible and invisible, whether imperial thrones or dominions or angelic orders or authorities, all things were in his hand and have been created by him. And he is before all things, and by him all things are sustained. And he is the head of the body, the congregation, who is the beginning, the firstborn of the resurrection of the dead, that he be preeminent in all things, because it pleased Elohim to complete all things in him. So do we see here, did Yahweh hold back his tithe? Did Yahweh hold back his firstborn? No, his son, no. Yahweh first gave his firstborn, Yeshua, to be sacrificed so that all the other firstborns can come later. And that's why it's sacred to Yahweh. It's sacred to him because until a seed dies, like I said, if it just sits on the ground, it does nothing, but when it dies, it brings forth more fruit. And the same thing here. Yahweh had to give his firstborn first in order for more firstborn to be born. And through him making peace by the blood of his crucifixion to reconcile all things to himself, through whom whether the things on the earth or the things in the heaven, and you then being alienated and hostile in your mind by evil works, but now peace has been given, through the sacrifice of his body and his death, so that he may raise you before him holy and without blemish and blameless. If indeed you continue in the faith grounded and settled, and not being moved away from the hope of the good news which you have heard, and which has been preached in all the creation under heaven, of which I, Paul, became a minister. And now rejoice in my sufferings on your behalf, and fill up in my flesh the things lacking of the afflictions of Messiah on behalf of his body, which is the congregation, of which I became a minister according to the stewardship of Elohim given to me, to preach the word of Yahweh everywhere, even the mystery having been hidden from the ages and from the generations, but now is revealed to his saints, to whom Yahweh willed to make known what are the riches of the glory of this mystery among the nations, which is Messiah in you, the hope of glory. So, do we have the fullness of the Holy Spirit now? No. What do we have? We have a tithe. We have an earnest. We have a tithe of the Holy Spirit. And Yeshua, who had to go first, because he was the first of the first fruits, he was Yahweh's tithe, heaven's best. And like it says here, he was crucified without sin, so that his sacrifice can be applied to us. And now, when you're immersed in his name, when you have the laying on of hands from an elder of Yahweh, now that spirit, that tithe goes in you. The tithe of the Holy Spirit, the earnest of it. And when he returns, what will happen? When he returns, we'll have the fullness of the Spirit. We'll shed these earthly bodies, and we'll be a glorified spirit body. So this is the reason why tithe and first fruits are so set apart, so sacred, so holy to Yahweh. 1 Corinthians 15. 1 Corinthians 15. Verse 20. But now Messiah has been raised from the dead. He became the first fruit of those having fell asleep. Just what we read. Drop down to verse 22. For as in Adam all die, so also Messiah all will be made alive, but each in his own order. Messiah the first fruit, after those of Messiah at his coming. Messiah the first fruit, after those of Messiah at his coming. You go to Revelation 14:4. So again, we see that not only was Yeshua the tithe of Yahweh, or the first fruit, but now we are the first fruit of Him. Revelation 14 and verse 4. These are the ones who had not become defiled, for they are pure. These are the ones following the Lamb wherever He may go. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits to Yahweh and the Lamb. So again, Yeshua His sacrifice is sacred, because without His sacrifice, none of us would be here. But now each of us are a type of first fruit to Him. And we're coming out of the world. We're coming out of the defilement of the world. We're bearing fruit to Yahweh. So you can see this whole concept of first fruits. I have a really good message I gave a couple of years ago at the feast called First Fruits unto Yah, that you can listen to. But it explains this particular subject of first fruits more in detail. Today, my subject is more particularly on the tithe. But I'm showing you how the tithe and first fruits are almost interchangeable. They're both set apart, and they're both sacred to Yahweh. We go to Numbers 18. Now let's start getting into what is the use of the tithe. What is the tithe used for? Like we said, the principle of the tithe is giving something back. It's not stated what Melchizedek used the tithe for in the book of Genesis, or for that matter, what tithes in general were used before there was a sanctuary. But clearly we see that once there's an official priesthood, and a priesthood now, it's not just one man in Abraham doing a sacrifice. It's not one man, a Lot, doing a sacrifice. It's not one man, Noah, doing a sacrifice. That Yahweh is literally now going to make an organized priesthood for taking care of His sanctuary. So now what He's going to tell those priests, that if you can't be in the world and you can't work in the world, that there has to be some way that you're taken care of. And that's what He's going to do. He is going to share His tithe with the Levite, as we're going to see here. Numbers 18 and verse 6. Numbers 18 and verse 6. And I, behold, I have taken your brothers the Levites from the midst of the sons of Israel. As a gift they are given to you by Yahweh to do the service of the tent of meeting. Levite became the tithe of Israel. They were taken among the sons of Israel for the work of the sanctuary. And you and your sons with you shall keep your priesthood in everything that pertains to the altar, and to that inside the veil, and you shall serve. I have given you the priesthood as a service of gift, and the stranger who comes near shall be caused to die. And Yahweh spoke to Aaron, saying, And I, behold, I have given to you the charge of my heave offerings, of all the devoted things of the sons of Israel. I have given them to you for the anointing, and to your sons by a perpetual statute. And this shall be yours of the most holy things from the fire. Every offering of theirs, even every food offering of theirs, every sin offering of theirs, every guilt offering, which they may render to me, it shall be most holy to you and to your sons. You shall eat it in the holy of holies, every male shall eat it, it shall be holy to you. And this is yours, the heave offering of their gift, with all the wave offerings of the sons of Israel. I have given them to you and to your sons and to your daughters with you by a never-ending statute. Every clean one in your house may eat it. And the best of the oil, and the best of the new wine, and the wheat, and the first fruit of them which they give to Yahweh, I have given to you. The first fruit of all that is in their land, which they bring into Yahweh, shall be yours. Every clean one in your house shall eat it. Every devoted thing in Israel shall be yours. Everyone opening a womb of all flesh, which they offer to Yahweh among men and among animals, shall be yours. Only you shall certainly redeem the firstborn of a man, and you will redeem the firstling of the unclean beast. And their redeemed ones from a month old you shall redeem with your valuation in silver, 5 shekels by the shekel of the sanctuary. It is 20 gerahs. By the firstling of an ox, or the firstling of a sheep, or the firstling of a goat, you shall not redeem. They are holy. You shall sprinkle their blood on the altar. And I think I'll stop there and drop down to verse 20. And Yahweh said to Aaron, You shall have no inheritance in their land, nor shall you have any portion among them. I am your portion and your inheritance among the sons of Israel. And behold, I have given all the tithe in Israel to the sons of Levi for an inheritance, in return for their service which they are serving, the service of the tent of meeting. And the sons of Israel shall not come near to the tent of meeting any more, lest they bear their sins and die. But the Levites shall do the service of the tent of meeting, and they shall bear their iniquity. It shall be a never-ending statute throughout your generations, that in the midst of the sons of Israel they shall have no inheritance. But the tithes of the sons of Israel, which they shall lift up to Yahweh a heave offering, I have given to the Levites for inheritance. Therefore I have said to them, they shall have no inheritance among the sons of Israel. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, You shall say to the Levites, and you shall speak to them, when you take the tithe for the sons of Israel, which I have given to you from them, from your inheritance, then you shall lift it a heave offering of Yahweh, a tithe of a tithe. And we'll get into that shortly. And your heave offering shall be counted to you as grain from the threshing floor, and the fullness from the winepress. So you also shall lift up the heave offering of Yahweh from all your tithes which you receive from the sons of Israel, and you shall give it from the heave offering of Yahweh to Aaron the priest. And you shall lift up the whole heave offering of Yahweh out of your gifts, and all its fat, its holy part. And you shall say them when you lift. You shall say to them, when you lift up its fat out of it, then it shall be counted to the Levites as increase of the threshing floor and as increase of the winepress. And you shall eat it in every place, you and your households, for it is your reward in return for the service in the tabernacle of the congregation. And you shall bear no sin because of it, since you have lifted up from it the best of it. And you shall not profane the holy things of the sons of Israel, that you may not die. So very clearly, Levi was the tithe of Israel. They were chosen to work as priests in the sanctuary of Yahweh. And because of this, Yahweh was sharing his tithe with Levi. It wasn't Levi's tithe, as we already saw. From the beginning of creation, the tithe is Yahweh's. It's just that Yahweh allowed Levi to partake of the tithe because they were doing the work of the sanctuary. And they did not have an inheritance in Israel, so Yahweh allowed it that way. Now, if we go to Hebrews 7, because we know in the New Covenant that the Levitical order has been fulfilled. We talked about this many times. I talked about it at the feast when I talked about Melchizedek. The Levitical order was simply a bridge from Mount Sinai to the Melchizedek order. We see originally Melchizedek is receiving tithes before Levi is even born. So we clearly see the point of tithing itself not only predates the tribe of Levi, but also who the tithe was going to predates Levi. So we'll read Hebrews, the 7th chapter. And we see, for this Melchizedek, for this king of righteousness, king of Salem, priest of the Most High Elohim, the one meeting Abraham, returning from the slaughter of the kings, and blessing him. To whom also Abraham divided a tenth of all. Remember we read that Abraham tithe. First being interpreted king of righteousness, then king of Salem, which is king of peace. Without father, without mother, without genealogy, nor beginning of days, nor having end of life. But as the son of Yahweh, his priesthood remains forever. Clearly Melchizedek is Yeshua. We talked about this. Anybody that may be hearing this message later, we have a message online called something of Melchizedek, the mystery of Melchizedek. If you want to watch it, it goes into this in detail. Now behold how great this one was, to whom even the patriarch Abraham gave tithes and paid head tax. For they of the sons of Levi who received the priesthood were authorized by the Torah that they should take tithes from the people, even from their own brethren who also came out of the loins of Abraham. But this man who is not recorded in the genealogies, talking about Melchizedek, took tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had received the promise. But it is beyond controversy that the inferior is blessed by his superior. The inferior is blessed by his superior. So here it is. Melchizedek is blessing Abraham. The inferior is blessed by his superior. And here men who die receive the tithes, talking about Levi. But there, he of whom the scripture testifies that he lives, receives them. Clearly Yeshua, the only one who lives forever. And through Abraham, as one may say, even Levi, who receives tithes, was himself tithe. Because Levi wasn't born, he's in the loins of Abraham as he's tithing. For he was yet in his father's loins when Melchizedek met him. If therefore perfection had been reached by the Levitical priesthood, by which the Torah was enacted for the people, what further need was there for another priest to rise after the order of Melchizedek? Otherwise the scriptures would have said that he would be after the order of Aaron. But as there is a change in the priesthood, from Levi back into Melchizedek, of necessity a change in the instruction of the Torah occurs. For he of whom these things were spoken, talking about Yeshua, was born of another tribe of which no one ever ministered at the altar. For it is evident that our Master has risen out of Judah, as to which tribe Moses spoke nothing concerning priesthood. And it's still more abundantly clear before he said that another priest should arise according to the order of Melchizedek. So very clearly he's making the point that since tithing is an eternal principle, since we see the principle of tithing to Melchizedek before Levi is even born, the fact that during when there was a physical sanctuary on the earth, that Yahweh allowed the tithe to be shared with the Levites who were working for the sanctuary, it doesn't take away from the fact of it was something that was temporary. Since the priesthood was temporary, so was the giving of the tithe to the priesthood temporary. And now, since the Levitical order has been fulfilled, there needs to be a change in the instruction of the Torah. So no longer, who are the Levites? Even if there were Levites today, what would it make sense for us to give our tithe to a system that Yahweh had already fulfilled? It would make no purpose. So again, where is the tithe going to? It's going to the order of Melchizedek. Verse 16, who has not become so according to a law of a fleshly command, but according to the power of life which abides forever. For it is testified, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. And the change which took place in the former law was made on account of its weaknesses and because it has fulfilled its usefulness. And again, we said this many times, the Levitical order was not Yahweh's intention. If you look in Exodus 19, 3-6, clearly all of Israel were to be a kingdom of priests after the golden calf. That changed. Levi was going to represent the high priesthood, but not all of the priesthood. And since that changed, the Levitical order became the bridge from Mount Sinai into Yeshua. But now, once Yeshua came, it fulfilled its usefulness. For the Levitical law perfected nothing but a bringing in of a better hope, through which we draw near to Yahweh. And he confirmed it by us by an oath, for they became priests without an oath, but this man by an oath, as he said to him by David, Yahweh has sworn, and will not lie, you are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek from Psalm 110. All these things make a better covenant because Yeshua is its surety. So, he's trying to make a point here that if the tithe is sacred, and in the time of a physical sanctuary that never perfected anything but the bringing of a better hope, if the tithe was given then during that system that never perfected anything, how much more is the tithe important now when the Melchizedek order is in fruition, that the Melchizedek order is working? That Yahweh's spiritual house, like Yeshua said, that he will destroy that sanctuary and rebuild it in 3 days. And he talked about the sanctuary of his body. So by far, from saying tithing is done away with, Paul, who I believe is the writer of Hebrews, is saying the opposite. He's showing that there's so much more importance now to the work of Yahweh from the tithe that was even there before. Verse 26, for this is the kind of high priest proper to us, holy, harmless, undefiled, and separated from sinners, and having become higher than the heavens, who has no need, as do the high priests who offer sacrifices day by day, first for his own sins, then for those of his people. But he did this once and for all, offering up himself. For the Levitical law makes men high priests who are imperfect, but the word of the oath which came after the Levitical law appoints the Son, who is perfect forever. So again, when we're looking at the purpose of the tithe in the New Covenant, we see it still doesn't change. That in the Old Covenant, the tithe was used for the Levites for the perfecting of the sanctuary of Yahweh. And the New Covenant is saying the same thing. That not going to the Levite, there's a change in instruction of the Torah, but that's still the purpose of the tithe. The purpose of the tithe is for the building of the sanctuary of Yahweh. So again, if you see somebody on the street that's homeless, if there's somebody that's poor and you want to give an offering to that person, that's well and good, and we should. The Bible tells us, that we should do well unto all men, particularly those of the household of faith. But that's not what the tithe is used for. The tithe is not used just to give to poor people. The tithe is not used to just give to somebody in need. The tithe is used to build the sanctuary of Yahweh. The tithe is used to preach the good news. Very few ministries and many people that come into this ministry, that will get our book or come on, one of the first things they say at least 60-70% of the time is, thank you so much that you're not charging, you're not marketing. Matthew 10 and verse 8 clearly says, freely you receive, freely you give. And again, I don't have a tree in my backyard that's producing great falling away books. There's not another tree in the back that has, Bibles hanging from it, and we go in the back and pick the Bibles off the tree. In the world we live in, it does cost money. So what I always say is, that the book is free, but not without cost. We don't have some kind of, place somewhere that we're, like I said, picking these things off trees, or that we're getting them for free. We have to pay like anybody else for everything. But the reason why we can freely give as we freely received is because Yahweh's people understand the basic principle of tithing. Because people are tithing, and that money for the tithe is going out for this. It's going out to help the saints, like now. I'm on my way in 2 weeks to the Philippines. Brethren of the household of faith that have lost everything, what happens? We're taking up special offering, but also if there's tithe that's needed for that, it can be used for brethren that are hurting that way in the body of Messiah. But if people weren't giving their tithes, we couldn't do any of that. If there were no tithes coming in, there could be no worldwide preaching work coming from Israel or Jerusalem or anywhere for that matter. So again, you can only do what you have. When our ministry was much, much smaller and we were giving out much less things, we still kept the principle, though, of freely you receive, freely you give. We never put a price tag on anything. And what I always said was, as people in the past have tried to get me to sell the book, The Great Falling Away, and the other things, and they say, yeah, but if you're not putting a price on it, how are you going to reproduce it? I tell them, that's Yahweh's economy. That's Yahweh's economy. When I first felt inspired by Yahweh to write that book going back in 2001, and all I am is the messenger, these decisions are made by the people upstairs, the home office as we call it. So I wrote the book without any money in hand. How am I going to pay for it? I don't know. If Yahweh said to write it, I'm sure He didn't waste my time or His time by having me do it. We didn't own a computer even. I scribbled it all, written it by hand, The Great Falling Away. I still have those original manuscripts. Then we went on a hand typewriter and typed it. And then finally, when we were able to borrow somebody's computer, we put it on the computer. And we had a 6-week trip around America that we were traveling to the brethren. And my dad said, use my credit card, get the order in, and we'll figure it out when you come back. So as we were traveling and we were in Texas, a man that should not have been driving on the road, he was like 88 years old. I don't know how he still had his license, but he came through a red light and smashed our car, totally destroyed it. And here it was, we had a car that had a lot of mileage on it. It was an old car. And insurance companies, they don't work very quickly. Within days, that insurance company wanted to give us money. And people were telling us, no, hold out, you can sue them, this and that. And I'm like, why would I want to sue them? We had some bruises on us, but we weren't hurt. We didn't go to a hospital. And here it was. They were not only paying my dad more money for his car than it was worth, they got us a nice rental car that was brand new. And they even said, even after we pay you, you can continue using it for the next 4 weeks as you're traveling around America. And they said, we'll give you and your wife $1,000 each for your troubles. I said, no trouble. And they said, no problem then. Put it in your pocket. And there comes the money for the Great Falling Away. We come home to New Jersey with exactly the money we needed. Freely you receive, freely you give. That's Yahweh's economy. And that's what we said. If the money isn't there to produce it, like now, we need to reproduce the Bible. We don't have the money for it. So what will we do? We'll wait on Yahweh, and we'll let the people know. We'll share with it, but we're not going to beg. We're not going to plead, and we're certainly not going to sell it. And if people want to help with that, then praise Yahweh. And if not, we'll wait. If Yahweh needs that Bible reprinted, then He'll provide the money, or we'll wait. But once we start putting a price tag, and I can tell you this much, from our first printing of the Bible, at least 70% of those Bibles went out without 1 penny being paid. We tell people, we try, if people can, we suggest a $30 donation to replace that Bible with another Bible. But 70% of the Bibles, every Bible that went to Africa, every Bible that went to Asia, every Bible that went to Philippines or anywhere else, no one paid a penny because they don't have the money. And by the tithes, the people that are being blessed and are faithful, that money is putting Bibles in people's hands. And I told you this. When I went to Africa, to Ethiopia, the brethren in Sudan that are poor as anything, what do you need? What can I bring you? You know what they say? Bibles. They're not looking for money. They're not looking for clothes or anything else. They want Bibles with Yahweh's name in it. That's what they're looking to. But that's the way Yahweh's economy works. And that's why the tithe is so important. Because by giving the tithe properly, it can make Yahweh's ministry go out, preach the gospel to the world, help the poor saints, and be able to work. I do believe in the New Testament that somebody who's working full-time for the ministry is able to pay his expenses from that. We see the principle with the tithe from Levi. We see it from Paul, that he says about, you shall not muzzle an ox as he, treads out the grain. Do you really think Yahweh is talking about oxen? And I don't think there's anything wrong with somebody working for the gospel to be able to provide and pay their food. Praise Yahweh, we don't have to do that. Just like the Apostle Paul, that he said, I have not taken this right. And I say the same thing. I believe it's a right of Yahweh. The workman is worthy of his hire, But I say this with all gladness that I haven't had to do it. We do not take 1 penny of salary from the ministry. And in a time where so many ministries are doing this for gain, that's to my glory that I can say that Yahweh has blessed us beyond measure. He has taken care of us, and we don't have to take a penny of salary money. But again, for other people that are out there, or ministers that are working full time, it's a shame that a minister would be of a congregation and he doesn't even have food to eat, while the congregation is out there maybe prospering. It would be a shame to that congregation. But although I do think in the times we're living in, we don't have even one salaried minister in the whole congregation, anywhere in the world for that matter. There is not one employee, paid employee, in the whole congregation. So again, if people are worried about money being pilfered, or like when I was in Church of God, people buying $5,000 curtains with the tithe money and built-in pools and all this other stuff, it certainly is not happening in Yahweh's congregation. So again, this is the reason for the tithe. This is what the tithe is used for. And without people tithing, without Yahweh's economy, it's going to stop. It would stop. There'd be no way to be able to bring the good news to the world or help people if Yahweh's people were not. And people are amazed in the world. They can't understand it. How can you do all this stuff without charging money? Because they don't understand it's better to give than to receive. They don't understand it. Yahweh's people, it's a blessing for us to tithe. And that when we tithe, and I've tithed for 30 years now, and I'm telling you, even when tithing was improperly told to me, and there were times where they were telling me I needed to give 30% of the tithe. In those years when I tithed 30%, even though it's not according to the scriptures, we'll see in a minute, I prospered more in those years than any other year of my life, because my attitude was, like I said, I'll give 90%. I don't even look at the tithe, because it doesn't matter that Yahweh says the minimal. If you do only what's minimal to you, consider yourself unprofitable. So I don't want to do the minimal. I want to give wherever there's a need. So if that need is 10%, great. If the need is more, then you give more. Whatever the need is, that's what we should be willing to do. And that's the way Yahweh's economy goes. So let's go to Deuteronomy 14 now, because I want to, like I said, in the congregation that I belonged to before, not only did they teach tithing, they taught triple tithing. 10% was for the work of Yahweh, as we're talking about. Then 10% of your income, they call the second tithe, was for the feast. And then in the third year, you were to tithe a third tithe. 30% of your money. And they preach this on your gross pay, not your net pay. Because that's another thing. You don't tithe on your gross, you tithe on your net. You tithe on your increase, whatever your increase is. So again, if all of a sudden I'm working for someone for 10 sheep, but before I get my pay, Caesar takes 5 of those sheep, then I can't tithe on 10 sheep, I didn't get 10. I tithe on my increase. Or if I'm a business owner, maybe I'm selling a product, and over a year I make $100,000, but my product cost $80,000. So my profit is $20,000. And you would tithe on your profit. You tithe on your increase, whatever Yahweh is increasing you for. And like we said in the beginning, tithe, ma'asar, eser, it means 10. It doesn't mean 30. It's that simple. If Yahweh wanted 30%, he would have said 30%. And he would have said Shloshim, 30, not Ma'asar, which is 10. So where are they getting this from? It's coming from Deuteronomy 14, and we'll see it here. And as we'll see, it's all part of the same tithe. There's one tithe, 10%, but it is broken down a little bit different. Deuteronomy 14 and verse 22. Deuteronomy 14 and verse 22. Tithing you shall tithe all the increase of your seed that the field brings you by year. Tithing you shall tithe. Didn't we just say this for the last 55 minutes? Yeah, tithing you shall tithe. So you have to tithe. Now, after you tithe, I have 10 oranges. I put one on the side. He says, and you shall eat before Yahweh your Elohim in the place which he chose to cause his name to dwell there. The tithe of the grain. So you already tithe, and you're taking a tithe of this now. Of the grain, of the wine, of the oil, and the firstlings of your flock, that you may learn to fear Yahweh all your days. So again now, it's not a second 10%. And logically, if you think about it, when you think of how much a tithe was over a year, you see with Jacob and Laban, you could have thousands of animals that could be increased. Can you imagine taking 10% for 1 week in Jerusalem? I mean, come on, what are you going to do with all that, all that sheep and cows? You couldn't eat all that in 1 week. So it's not another 10%, it's 10% of your 10%. So you have $100 as your increase. You take 10% and set it apart for Yahweh. And what does Yahweh say? It's better to give than to receive. So even his 10%, he says take 10% of that and set it apart for the feast. So now if you had 100, you set 10%, $10 for Yahweh. $1 of that you get to set apart for the feast, to come to the feast. And like he says, and if the way is too long for you to carry it, so if at the end of the year, you have 4 sheep, and all this, and it's like, how am I going to carry this to Jerusalem? He says you can sell it and put it into silver, and then come to Jerusalem and show him the faithfulness of your tithing. There's other scriptures that talk about bringing the tithe up to Jerusalem. We have people that do that actually bring their tithe up at feast time to Jerusalem, and there's a blessing. There's a blessing that's involved there. And he says, and now, because you've been faithful, because you've tithed, and Yahweh's faithful back to you, look what he says. And you could, verse 26, you can pay the silver for whatever your soul rightly desires. For oxen, for sheep, for wine, or for fermented drink, or whatever your soul desires. And you shall eat there before Yahweh your Elohim, and you shall rejoice, you and all your household. And you shall not forsake the Levite who's within your gates, for he has no portion or inheritance. At the end of 3 years, even the same year, you shall bring all forth the tithe of your increase, and lay it within your gates. So now, this tithe of the tithe, this 10% of your tithe, every 3rd year you don't use it for you use it for the Levite, and you use it for the poor. And the Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance with you, and the alien, and the fatherless, and the widow within your gates, shall come and eat and be satisfied, so that Yahweh your Elohim may bless you in the work that your hand has to do. And here it is. As you people know, you've been keeping the feast with us for years. Every year there's people that come to the feast there that did not have the money to come. So how? How were they able to come? By this. That if people are simply faithful, and if people were tithing, and then using the tithe of the tithe, 2 years for them, 1 year for the poor, it works for everybody. And that's why we've been able to bring people from all over the world, the poorest countries in the world, that it's been a dream to them. And I always go back to the first Kenyan elder that we brought there. And when I said, oh, I'm so bad, I'm so sad, I wish we could have brought more Kenyans here. And he said, don't be sad. When one Kenyan comes, we all come. That you can bring one person from a country there, and now he's going to go back in for months. Thousands of people are going to be around him, asking him all questions about Jerusalem, about the feast, about Israel. So here it is. How else can it be done? It certainly couldn't be done. These are people that make maybe $5 a week if they're working. They could never in a million years ever afford to come to Israel to the feast. And yet, we have more people coming like that than ever before. Why? Because they're being faithful. And if you are faithful in little, Yahweh will be faithful in much. And here it is, other people I know, some of them making even hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and they say they can't afford to come to Israel for the feast. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. You're making $100,000, $150,000 a year. You're in debt. Your credit cards are filled. You always owe money. Something's wrong. And most of the time it's because they're not tithing. they're not tithing. It's that simple. Or they're improperly using their tithe. They're not using it for the sanctuary of Yahweh, they're using it for something else. I know people that have taken their tithe money, using it on unconverted family members, using it to care for unconverted parents. That's not what the tithe is for. You know, and it's a good thing to care for your parents and everything else, but that's not what your tithe is for. Remember, the tithe is holy to Yahweh. The same way as the Sabbath is holy to Yahweh. This is the day to set us apart from the world. It's not the day I'm going to go and help my father clean his house. If he needs help, I'll help him 6 other days. I'm not going to help him on Shabbat. It's that simple. This is something set apart to Yahweh. The tithe is something set apart to Yahweh. If we go to Deuteronomy 26, we'll see again the tithe principle. Deuteronomy 26, 1 through 4. And it shall be when you have come into the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving to you as an inheritance, and you have possessed it and live in it, then you shall take the first of all the fruit of the ground which you shall bring in from your land, which Yahweh your Elohim has given to you, and you shall put it in a basket, and shall go to the place which Yahweh your Elohim shall choose to cause his name to dwell there, to Jerusalem. And you shall come to the priest who is in those days, and shall say to him, I declare today to Yahweh your Elohim that I have come into the land which Yahweh has sworn to our fathers to give. And the priest shall take the basket out of your hand and place it before the altar of Yahweh your Elohim. And this is what I said. Some people actually will bring their tithe to Jerusalem, and they're blessed for it. They will be blessed for it, without a shadow of a doubt. Because that's what Yahweh says. That's where his word is coming from. Now go down to verse 9. And he has brought us to this place, and has given to us a land flowing with milk and honey. And now behold, I have brought in the first of the fruits of the ground, which you have given to me, O Yahweh, and you have placed it before Yahweh your Elohim, and bow yourself before Yahweh your Elohim. And rejoice in all the good which Yahweh your Elohim has given to you, and to your house, you and the Levite and the alien who is in your midst. Didn't we just read? In the 3rd year, the tithe of the tithe goes to who? The alien and the Levite. When you have made an end of tithing, all the tithes of your increase the 3rd year. See, it's not another 10%. It's a tithe of the tithe. What is a tithe of the tithe? A tithe is 10%. A tithe of the tithe would be 10% of your 10%. When you have made an end of tithing all the tithes of your increase the 3rd year, the year of tithing, and have given it to the Levite, the alien, the orphan, and the widow, and they may eat inside your gates and be filled, then you shall say before Yahweh your Elohim, I have consumed the devoted things from the house, and also have given them to the Levite, and to the alien, and to the orphan, and to the widow, according to all your command which you have commanded me. I have not transgressed your command, and I have not forgotten. I have not eaten of it in my mourning, nor have I put it away for uncleanness. Nor have I given of it for the dead. I have listened to the voice of Yahweh my Elohim. I have done according to all that you have commanded me. Look down from your holy habitation from heaven, and bless your people Israel, and the land which you have given to us, as you swore to our fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. Today Yahweh your Elohim commands you to do these statutes and judgments. You shall be careful to do them with all your heart and with all your soul. You have today declared Yahweh to be your Elohim, and to walk in his ways, and to keep his statutes and his commandments, and his judgments, and to pay attention to his voice. And Yahweh has declared you today to be his people, a special treasure, as he has spoken to you, and to keep all his commandments. And he will make you high above the nations that he has made, in praise, and in name, and in glory, and that you may be a holy people to Yahweh Elohim, as he has spoken. So again, how much is involved in this tithe? Faithfulness, blessing. You know, the blessing of the land. All of it is connected here together. Nehemiah 10, Nehemiah, the 10th chapter, verse 34, talks again about this tithe of the tithe principle. It says, and we have, Nehemiah 10:34, and we have made full the lots among the priests and the Levites and the people for the wood offering to bring into the house of our Elohim, according to the houses of our father, at the times appointed year by year, to burn on the altar of Yahweh our Elohim, as it is written in the Torah. Also to bring the first fruits of our ground, and the first fruits of all the fruit of the trees year by year to the house of Yahweh. Also to bring the firstborn of our sons, then he goes into it, then verse 37, and that we should bring the first fruits of our dough and all that. And then verse 38, and the priest, the son of Aaron, shall be with the Levites, tithing the Levites, and the Levites shall bring up the tithe of the tithes to the house of our Elohim, to the rooms and into the treasure houses. For the sons of Israel and the sons of Levi shall bring the offering of the grain, and the new wine and the oil to the rooms, and there shall be the vessels of sanctuary. So can you see it? Very simple. That if you're looking at the poor, if all of Israel every third year would bring just the tithe of the tithe up, that would be more than to counteract the poor that they had. 2 years you get to keep that tithe of the tithe for yourself, and then the third year is for the poor. And again, just by the tithing principle, the increase that Yahweh can give year by year will make it, like he says, where you can't even count the blessings. You can't even fill it all in your storehouses that Yahweh has given. But clearly we have to be faithful. We have to be faithful about it. Now let's go to Malachi 3, because in the end time, unfortunately, people are not being faithful with the tithe of Yahweh. And interesting enough, there's people out there that want to follow the Karaites, a particular Karaite, Nehemiah Gordon. And I was with him one time several years ago, and he was saying the Karaites do everything exactly like the Bible. I said, oh, what do you do with your tithe? Oh, we don't tithe. There's no sanctuary. He said, if someone sends me a check and says tithe on it, I send it back to him. I said, well, when you earn money, what do you do with the 10%? I put it in my pocket and spend it. Well, isn't the tithe holy? Not if there's no sanctuary. Well, why not? I'm going to read it here. I read the scripture for him. Why not store the tithe then until there's a sanctuary? Oh, no, that would be stealing. So what do you do with it then? Put it in my pocket and spend it. And there are people that are actually, we need to follow the Karaites. The blind leading the blind. And both fall into the pit. Malachi 3, in verse 6. For I am Yahweh, I do not change. Because of this, you sons of Jacob are not destroyed. From the days of your fathers, you have turned aside from my statutes and have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says Yahweh of hosts. But you say, what shall we return? That's what they're saying. We're doing everything right. Will a man rob Elohim? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, what have we robbed you? In the tithe and the offering. You are cursed with a curse for the nation. All of it, you are robbing me. Judah doesn't tithe either. Judaism does not tithe. For the same reason that Nehemiah Gordon said. Oh, there's no temple, you can't tithe. They're not tithing, they're stealing from Yahweh. Bring all the tithe into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house. Hey, why not? Why not store it in a storehouse? And test me now with this, says Yahweh of hosts, whether I will open the windows of heaven for you and pour out a blessing until there is no sufficiency of room to store it. And like I said, from my own life, 30 years in this walk, all I can say is, by faithfully tithing to Yahweh, doesn't matter whether I earned $1 and I gave 10 cents, or if it was $100,000 and I'm giving 10,000, it doesn't make any difference what it was. By faithfully always giving Yahweh his tithe, Yahweh is always taking care. It's a principle. There is no way that if you are faithful and you are tithing, that you will ever be starving, you'll ever be lacking, you'll ever not have food or clothing. Yahweh will care for you. Because he owns the universe and give you more than you can handle, like he's saying here. Put him to the test. So anybody out there who's thinking, I can't afford to tithe, saying it again, you cannot afford not to tithe. You cannot afford not to tithe. Proverbs 3 and 9 through 10. Proverbs 3, 9 and 10. Says, honor Yahweh with your substance and with the first fruits of all your increase, and your barn shall be filled with plenty, and your wine vat shall burst with new wine. So the same as we read here in Malachi. Put him to the test. When you honor Yahweh, he'll honor you. And like I said, it's pretty good to be partners with the guy who owns the universe. It's a pretty good deal. Pretty good partnership. Malachi 1, in verse 6. I want to go through quickly one more aspect of tithing before we end here. Malachi 1 and verse 6. It says, a son honors his father and a servant his master. If then I am a father, where is my honor? And if I am a master, where is my fear? It says, Yahweh of hosts, to you, O priests, who despise my name. But you say, what is we despise your name? You are offering defiled food on my altar. And you say, what have we defiled you? It is in your saying, the table of Yahweh, it is to be despised. And if you offer the blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? And if you offer the lame and the sick, is it not evil? Bring it now to your governor. Will he accept you, or lift up your face, says Yahweh of hosts? And now entreat the face of Elohim that he favors us. This has been in your hands, and he will lift up your faces, says Yahweh of hosts. Who is even among you that will shut the doors, and you not kindle fire on my altar in vain? There is no delight to me in you, says Yahweh of hosts. I will not accept a food offering from your hand. And from the rising of the sun to the going down, my name shall be great among the nations, and everywhere incense shall be offered to my name. And a pure food offering for my name shall be great among the nations, says Yahweh of hosts. But you are profaning it when you say the table of Yahweh. It is polluted, and its fruit, his food, is to be despicable. And you have said, behold what weariness, and you have sniffed at it, says Yahweh of hosts. And you bring the stolen and the lame and the sick, and you bring the grain offering. Should I accept it from your hand, says Yahweh? But cursed be a deceiver, and there is a male in his flock, and he vows it, but he sacrifices a blemished one to Yahweh. For I am a great king, says Yahweh of hosts, and my name feared among the nations. And again, what is he saying? He's saying people that are talking the talk, but not walking the walk. They're giving to Yahweh. They're saying they're giving to Yahweh. They're saying that the best is to Yahweh, and yet it's not. They're doing this bait and switch. And like I said, tithing is increase of everything. It's not just your vegetables in the garden. It's not just those little pieces of paper you get at the end of the week that we call a check with money on it or cash. But knowledge. Do you know knowledge that's given to you is increase? Are you tithing your knowledge? Are you taking what Yahweh's giving you and making sure 10% at least is going back to somebody else? Are you tithing when Yahweh gives you something? If He's giving you knowledge to know how to do whatever, to build this wood, am I tithing that back? My time. Am I tithing my time to Yahweh? 24 hours in a day, 2.4 hours go to Yahweh. And what does He say? Don't give Him the worst. You know, Yahweh doesn't want your 3-second prayer at the end of a day that you worked for yourself and done everything for yourself. And thank you, Father. He's not looking for that. The tithe is something that's sacred and holy. And it's set apart to Yahweh. And the best 10% should be going to Him, not the last 10%. The best 10%. Everything you do to the glory of Yahweh. The best of our time, the best of our efforts, the best of our resources, the best of everything we have. Our gifts, spiritual and physical, the best of everything should be going to Yahweh first. Like I said, before you set apart His 10%, you don't own that 90%. And many people today, when I look in the West, in America, in Babylon, I see the most deficient spiritual place on the face of the earth. And yet at another end, I see a lot of physical blessings that are there that people are not using for Yahweh. So again, in some places you see very little physical blessings and a lot of other blessings. It doesn't matter whether it's physical things, money and mammon, or it's spiritual things. Everything must be used for the glory of Yahweh and everything has to be tied to Him. It's that simple. And I fear for a lot of the brethren in the West that are doing neither. They're not using their resources toward the work of Yahweh, and they're not spiritually growing. And what's going to happen when the day comes? That Yahweh comes back, like the parable of the talents, saying, what did you gain with what I gave you? Not everybody is a spiritual giant. To some people, their biggest gift was that Yahweh blessed them financially. I know people that aren't that smart and have a lot of finances. Use it. Use it. Use it for the glory of Yahweh. I know other people that are so smart, I've been in third world countries, don't have a penny to their name. That's fine too. Then use your ingenuity, use your smartness toward the glory of Yahweh. Whatever it is you have, use to the glory of Yahweh. But by far, remember, tithing is a principle. 10% of any increase of anything must go to Yahweh. That's the way it's got to be. 2 Corinthians 9, I won't go there. But it talks about Yahweh loving and cheerful giver. Yahweh loving and cheerful giver. Tithing shouldn't be a burden to us. It shouldn't be something that it's like, I've got to give this 10%. We shouldn't be doing it simply to be blessed, although you will be blessed. But Yahweh loves a cheerful giver. We should be so happy that we're a piece of the puzzle, we're a child of His, and we're able to help. That, like I said, every Bible that goes out there around the world, every book that goes out there, every Bible study, every DVD, everything that's being produced in the name of Yahweh through His ministries all over the world. That we should take solace that we're a piece of that. That we're able to, with these crummy little fingers we have, to do something that's producing for the kingdom of Yahweh. So we have to make sure that we're cheerful givers, that we're not belittling it. Matthew 23:23, I won't go there either. It's where Yeshua is talking to the Pharisees. He says, you tithe dill and mint, and yet you put away the weightier matters of the law. So again, tithing is not the most heaviest matter of the law. As we know, judgment, mercy, faith, love, but it is important. Yeshua said you should have done this one without undoing that one. So tithing is still there. He's not saying not to do it. But not to feel justified. Oh, I give all my tithes and I can treat people like dirt. That's not what it's about. One does not equate with the other. So again, Matthew 10 and verse 8, freely receive, freely we give. The way that Yahweh's true ministers can freely give away books, Bibles, DVDs, magazines, is by the faithful tithing of Yahweh's people. It's a blessing that each of us have in participating in preaching the good news of Yeshua. We can give extra offerings as much as we want and help the poor and other people, but the tithe is something that's set apart for Yahweh in the building of the sanctuary. It is a commandment, and we're stealing from Yahweh if we're not willingly giving our tithes when we receive increase. 1 Peter 2, 9 and 10, I'll end there. 1 Peter 2, 9 and 10. Says, but you are an elect race, a royal priesthood, a holy people, a people for possession. We are literally the tithe of Yahweh. We are the possession of Him. That you should proclaim the praises of Him who called you out of darkness to His precious light. You who were then not a people, but now are the people of Yahweh. Who were not obtained mercy, but now have obtained the mercies poured out upon you. We are a royal priesthood to Yahweh to proclaim His soon coming kingdom to this rebellious earth. The tithe is for that work. Yahweh tithed Yeshua, heaven's best. Are we tithing the best that we have? Tithe is for the preaching, the building of the sanctuary of Yahweh. If we are either holding back, then we're missing out on many blessings, and we're stealing from Yahweh. So Yahweh bless. Like I said, I am thankful that overall around the world that Yahweh has blessed His people so much that we can go out there and do His work. We can share with people. It's been amazing the last 2-3 years what we've been able to do. We've been able to build buildings for our congregations in third world places. We've been able to help people that have lost everything in storms and troubles. We've been able to help the budgets. About 90% of the money that comes into our congregation goes to international work. For the budgets of Philippines, Africa, South America, wherever that may be. So I praise Yahweh for the blessing of His people, and Yahweh bless.